How the tiger got his stripes. This story took place in prehistoric times, when animals still had the power of speech. A young farmer had just stopped plowing his rice paddy. It was noon, and he sat down to eat his lunch in the shade of a banana plant near his land. Not far away, his water buffalo was grazing along the grass-covered dikes enclosing the rice fields. After the meal, the farmer reclined and observed the stout beast, which was chewing quietly. From time to time, it would chase away the obnoxious flies with a vigorous swing of its massive head. Suddenly, the great beast became alarmed. The wind carried the odor of a dangerous animal. The buffalo rose to its feet and awaited the arrival of the enemy. With the speed of lightning, a tiger sprang into the clearing.
"I have not come as an enemy,"
he said.
"I only wish to have something explained. I have been watching you every day from the edge of the forest, and I have observed the strange spectacle of your common labor with the man. That man, that small and vertical being, who has neither great strength nor sharp vision, nor even a keen sense of smell, has been able to keep you in bondage and work you for his profit. You are actually 10 times heavier than he, much stronger, and more hardened to heavy labor. Yet he rules you. What is the source of his magic power?"
"To tell the truth,"
said the buffalo,
"I know nothing about all that. I only know I shall never be free of his power, for he has a talisman he calls wisdom."
"I must ask him about that.
said the tiger.
Because, you see, if I could get this wisdom, I would have even greater power over the other animals. Instead of having to conceal myself and spring on them unawares, I could simply order them to remain motionless. I could choose from among all the animals, at my whim and fancy, the most delicious meats."
"Well,"
replied the startled buffalo,
"why don't you ask the farmer about his wisdom?"
the tiger decided to approach the farmer.
"Mr. Man,
He said,
I am big, strong, and quick, but I want to be more. I have heard it said that you have something called wisdom, which makes it possible for you to rule over all the animals. Can you transfer this wisdom to me? It would be of great value to me in my daily search for food."
"Unfortunately,
replied the man,
I have left my wisdom at home. I never bring it with me to the fields. But if you like, I will go there for it."
"May I accompany you?"
asked the tiger, delighted with what he had just heard.
"No, you had better remain here.
Replied the farmer.
If the villagers see you with me, they may become alarmed and perhaps beat you to death. Wait here. I will find what you need in return."
And the farmer took a few steps, as if to set off homeward. But then he turned around and with wrinkled brow addressed the tiger.
"I am somewhat disturbed by the possibility that during my absence you might be seized with the desire to eat my buffalo. I have great need of it in my daily work. Who would repay me for such a loss?"
The tiger did not know what to say. The farmer continued,
"If you consent, I will tie you to a tree. Then my mind will be free."
The tiger wanted the mysterious wisdom very much, so much, in fact, that he was willing to agree to anything. He permitted the farmer to pass ropes round his body and to tie him to the trunk of a big tree. The farmer then went home and gathered a great armload of dry straw. He returned to the big tree and placed the straw under the tiger and set it on fire.
Behold my wisdom.
He shouted at his unfortunate victim as the flames encircled the tiger and burned him fiercely. The tiger roared so loudly that the neighboring trees trembled. He raged and pleaded, but the farmer would not untie him. Finally, the fire burned through the ropes, and he was able to free himself from cremation. He bounded away into the forest, howling with pain. In time his wounds healed, but he was never able to rid himself of the long black stripes of the ropes which the flames had seared into his flesh. The supernatural crossbow. This is a legend taken from the ancient chronicles. More than 2,300 years ago, the king of the realm of Tuk sought to marry a princess from the house of the Hongbang, which was reigning in the kingdom of Van Lang. Embittered by the refusal that he received, he swore the ruin of the Hongbang, but he died without satisfying his hatred, leaving the task to his descendants. This was the origin of the continual wars between the kingdoms of Tuk and Van Lang. For many years, the Hongbang were victorious. But powerful in their success and certain of the protection of the genie, they relaxed their vigilance and lived in idleness and indolence. Their enemy, Tuk Fan, a king of the realm of Tuk, began a long series of military preparations. He chose the right moment to invade Van Lang and crush the Hongbang. Tuk Fan united the two kingdoms of Tuk and Van Lang under the name of Alak and took the name of Nduongvang for himself. He established his capital in the territory of Phong Ki. Desirous of protecting his realm against the bandits of the north, he ordered a mighty wall to be built at the northern extremity of his capital. But as soon as the wall was finished, a violent storm broke out and rain poured down in torrents. A strong wind howled and roared until the wall fell with a deafening crash. And Nduongvang rebuilt the wall 3 times, but as soon as it was completed, it was destroyed again in the same way. At last a council of ministers was called. One minister, cleverer than the others, arose and bowed.
Will the Son of Heaven be pleased to hear my humble opinion?
He asked.
Since the wall has been destroyed so many times in the same way, it must be that the gods are against us. Let us attempt to appease them by erecting an altar and making sacrifices to ask them for advice and help.
This suggestion met with general approval. Accordingly, the king ordered the erection of an altar on the riverbank outside the eastern gate. Cows and buffaloes were sacrificed and prayers were said. The king himself fasted for 3 days and nights and prostrated himself for hours before the altar, asking for guidance. On the 7th day of the 3rd month, a genie in the shape of an enormous golden tortoise appeared to the king in a dream and spoke in a human voice.
Son of Heaven,
he said,
your prayers have been heard by the gods, who have been pleased to send me here to help you.
Then the tortoise instructed him in the proper way to build the wall.
This is a land of rivers and mountains, populated by spirits. The spirits of the mountains have caused your wall to crumble.
He continued,
for they are very mischievous and like to play tricks on human beings to show their power.
When the king awoke the next morning, he remembered all that the tortoise had told him. He followed instructions exactly and built a great wall of fortifications in the form of a seashell or conch. He called it Koloa, and the capital became known as Koloatan, or the city of the conch. And Duongdong now felt that his wall would resist the elements and that his city was secure. But he also realized that he was surrounded by powerful enemies and that he might not always be able to defend it. The golden tortoise understood his doubts and again appeared to him in his sleep.
Prosperity or misfortune depends on the will of heaven.
He said,
But if men are deserving, heaven will aid them. Since you manifest such great confidence in me, I will make you a present of one of my claws, which you can use as a trigger for your crossbow. It will drive away evil spirits, and it will even defeat an entire army in battle. But never forget that the ultimate safety of your realm depends on your vigilance.
The tortoise pulled off one of his claws and entrusted it to the king. He then returned to the river and disappeared. The king was very happy when he awoke and found the magic claw in his hand. He ordered a precious crossbow to be made with the magic claw as trigger, and a beautiful crystal case was made to contain the crossbow. The king was very grateful to the tortoise, for now he firmly believed his realm would enjoy peace and order for many years. At that time, China was under the rule of the powerful Emperor Shi Huang of the Qin dynasty. Shi Huang had conquered all his feudal neighbors and his armies reached to the South Sea. In the same year that Duongdong began the Great Wall, he sent a great army of men and horses down from southern China to conquer the kingdom of Olak. But this army was flown back time after time and was finally destroyed by the magic crossbow before it even approached Koloatan. 3 years later, Shi Huang sent forth another army, 500,000 strong, under the leadership of the great General Truda, and the northern part of Olak easily fell into Chinese hands. The Chinese hordes came in 3 sections: on horse, on foot, and by boat. They came with flags floating in the air, forests of weapons clashing together, and fierce-looking officers riding forward on their foaming steeds. Truda deployed his troops on the mountain of the rusty axe, his junks on the river, and besieged the capital. King Duongdong watched calmly from a window of his citadel as the 3 sections poured on towards Koloatan like a powerful swarm of ants. Then he walked to the ramparts, taking with him the magic crossbow with the holy tortoise's claw, and fired 3 arrows at the multitude of enemy soldiers.
Twang! 10,000 Chinese soldiers fell like dry leaves. With the second arrow another 10,000 fell, and with the third arrow, another 10,000.
The remainder of the army retreated in panic. Truda was too ashamed and afraid to return to give his emperor an account of his defeat. Incapable of fighting against a supernatural weapon, he decided to master Duongdong deceitfully. He pretended to make peace with him by sending his son, Trong Tui, to the royal court as a hostage to indicate his desire for friendly relations. The king received the latter in good faith. He was even generous enough to extend his friendship to the young man, admitting him to his entourage and giving him his only daughter, Princess Mai Chao, in marriage. He gave Truda a large county situated north of the Banjiang as his special province. Trong Tui loved his wife, and for a time the newlywed couple lived in perfect happiness. The young princess was charming herself, and Trong Tui adored her.
Yet in his heart he never forgot the secret mission with which he had been entrusted, and secretly vowed to help his father conquer Olak at some future date.
Trong Tui coaxed and cajoled his innocent wife, beseeching her to let him see the miraculous crossbow, she yielded in the end and showed it to him. He examined it carefully and made a false claw. He then stole the holy claw and replaced it with the false one. One day Trong Tui requested in Duongbang's permission to go home to visit his parents. To Princess Mai Chao, he explained that conjugal love should not cause one to neglect one's duty towards one's parents. It had been a long time since he had prostrated himself before them, and he regretted that he could not take her with him. The route to the northern territories was long, and it passed through forests and mountains infested with bandits. Princess Mai Chao flung herself on the ground before him and clung to his feet. "Please do not go away, my lord," she implored. "Is this unhappy person to be alone for months, perhaps for years? There are so many lofty mountains and deep valleys which separate our two countries. Who knows what might happen to my lord during such a long and dangerous journey? How can I restrain my tears at the prospect of such a long separation? The cowherd and the spinning maid in heaven meet across the Milky Way once a year, but shall we ever meet again?" And the princess wept more bitterly than ever. "Does this weeping become the most worshipful daughter of the dragon?" asked Trong Tui, trying to soothe her feelings. "Of course, your unworthy servant will come back to you, and then we shall live together as happily as before." But the princess would not stop weeping, for she had a foreboding of some great misfortune. "Would my lord please remember his gift of a brocaded winter coat lined with goose down," she said in tears. "Our love is imperishable, but the peace of nations is often ephemeral. If ever a war occurs between our countries, I will scatter the down at the crossroads to show you the way I have taken." At the moment of separation, Trong Tui was filled with a strange emotion. His wife, in her love and confidence in him, had unconsciously betrayed her father and country. The separation was heartrending. After many bitter tears and vows of love and devotion, he left with an unbearable pain in his heart, for he loved the princess and had to betray her ignominiously for the sake of his father and his country. Trong Tui then rejoined his father and gave him the holy claw. Truda was overjoyed and at once led a strong army across the land to a lac. The sunlight glittered on the lances and spurs of the Chinese soldiers, and their multicolored banners fluttered in the wind. The army wound its way out of the land of Tarn like a gigantic snake, and the beating of the war drums resounded in the distance like thunder. And Duongbang and his daughter were playing chess when the tower watchman entered and flung himself at their feet. "Son of heaven and daughter of the dragon, the enemy is coming." "Let them come," said the king, roaring with laughter at the thought of these bold and foolish men coming to meet certain death. "Have no fear, my beloved daughter, the magic crossbow will again work miracles." And he let the enemy approach without going forth to meet them, nor did he give orders for the defense of the capital. When the sentry from the summit of the ramparts reported that the Chinese hordes obscured the horizon, he was content to say, "Has my neighbor forgotten the magic crossbow?" And he continued the game of chess. When the enemy was at the very gates of Koloatan, the king arose and aimed the crossbow. But after the first shot, he realized he had been betrayed. He fired again and again, but the enemy continued to flow forward like a devastating flood. Deciding to escape, and Duongbang barely had time to mount his horse, bringing Mai Chao up behind him. They galloped swiftly to the south, leaving in Duongbang's capital and kingdom behind them. They rode past many fields and marshes, and as they approached the crossroads, Mai Chao left a trail of goose down so that Trong Tui might follow. Back at the palace, Trong Tui perceived that the king and his daughter had fled and immediately gave chase. Guided by traces of down, he was not long in picking up their trail. And Duong Vong crossed plains and forests like a tornado. He scaled hills, cascaded down slopes, and crossed rivers. Each time he slowed the pace, he would hear the gallop of his pursuer. Then he would spur his horse anew, and the wild flight would begin again. On went the king's horse, carrying them farther and farther away, until at last they came to a great sea. Not a boat was to be seen, and it was apparent that there was no way to cross. The king lifted his face to the sky and cried in despair, "O gods, have you forsaken me? And you, holy tortoise, where are you in my hour of need?" Out of the deep blue sea arose the golden tortoise and cried in a powerful voice, "Beware of the treacherous enemy who sits behind you." The king turned around in his saddle and gazed at the princess. My Chow shivered like a leaf in a storm, and large tears rolled down her cheeks. While the princess looked at him imploringly, and Duong Vong grasped a dagger and stabbed her ruthlessly in the heart. Then, drawing his great sword, he cut off her head. Filled with horror at his shameful deed, the king followed the golden tortoise into the storm-tossed waters and disappeared. When Trong Tui arrived at the scene and discovered the severed body of my Chow, his anguish knew no bounds. Shedding bitter tears, he gathered up the fragile body and carried it back to the capital for burial. One day, unable to bear his grief any longer, Trong Tui threw himself into the deep pond where my Chow had loved to bathe. In this way his soul would go to the other world with the one he had loved. The blood that flowed from the princess' body was washed away by the rolling sea and absorbed by the many oysters of that shore. Since that time they have produced many beautiful pearls, and legend has it that these pearls became more brilliant when dipped into the pond where Trong Tui drowned himself. The reputation of the pond water spread as far as China, and the emperor demanded that a vase containing the liquid be added to the triennial tribute. Today we can see a small temple on a mountain near the seashore where Princess Mai Chow met her death. But it is particularly at Koh Loa Tan, the ancient city of the conch, that tradition keeps alive the cult of Duong Vong and Mai Chow. There, in the sanctuary of the temple, a flame has burned for 2,000 years before the tablet of heroes who have fought for national independence. Farther on, a sacred banyan tree, several centuries old, covers the humble altar of Princess Mai Chow.